For my birthday, my wife presented me with a cake that read, "Congrats on being average." My daughter recorded everyone laughing while I pretended to smile. I blew out the candles, took photos, and cleaned up the mess alone. Nobody noticed I remained silent. A week later, she reached out at 3 a.m., screaming, "You emptied everything." I, 42M, thought I had a decent life. 2 decades married, steady job at the accounting firm, house in the suburbs with a decent yard. My daughter was in college, my wife worked part-time at the local boutique, and we had our routines. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday football, anniversary dinners at the same Italian place we'd been going to for 15 years. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. The way conversations stopped when I entered rooms. How my wife would quickly close her laptop when I walked by. The little smirks between her and my daughter during family dinners. But I was comfortable in my bubble, content with what I thought was normalcy. My birthday fell on a Wednesday this year. I came home from work expecting the usual small celebration we always did. Maybe my favorite takeout, a store-bought cake, and a card. Instead, I found our living room decorated with balloons and streamers. My wife had invited her sister, my brother-in-law, their kids, and even some neighbors. It was more effort than she'd put into my birthday in years. I was genuinely touched. Maybe things were getting better between us. Maybe she'd been planning this surprise for weeks. I hugged her and thanked her, telling her how amazing everything looked. She just smiled, that smile I couldn't quite read anymore. Everyone gathered around as she brought out the cake. It was beautifully decorated, professionally done, with perfect frosting roses. But as she set it down in front of me, I felt my stomach drop. In elegant script across the top, it read, "Congrats on being average." The room erupted in laughter. My wife was practically doubled over, pointing at my face. My daughter had her phone out, recording everything, barely able to hold it steady because she was laughing so hard. The neighbors joined in, my brother-in-law slapped his knee, and even the kids were giggling. I stood there, staring at that cake, feeling like I was watching this happen to someone else. The laughter seemed to go on forever, echoing off the walls of my own living room. I forced my face into what I hoped looked like a smile and tried to laugh along. I told everyone it was hilarious, that my wife really got me good this time. My wife wiped tears from her eyes and explained to everyone how she'd been planning this for weeks. She said I was always talking about being content with mediocrity, about how I never wanted to rock the boat or try anything new. She said she thought it would be funny to celebrate my commitment to being perfectly average in every way. More laughter, more phone recordings. I kept that fake smile plastered on my face and played along. I made jokes about embracing my averageness, about how I was proud to be the most middle-of-the-road guy in the room. Everyone ate it up. When it came time to blow out the candles, I made a wish. Not for happiness or health or wealth. I wished for the strength to remember this moment exactly as it was happening. Every laugh, every smirk, every person who thought humiliating me was entertainment. The photos were endless. Me with the cake, me cutting the cake, me feeding my wife a bite while she grinned at the camera. Group shots with everyone pointing at the cake's message. My daughter posted them to social media before I'd even finished cleaning up. And I did clean up. Alone. While everyone else moved to the living room to continue the party, I scraped frosting off plates, loaded the dishwasher, swept up crumbs. My wife checked on me once, asking if I needed help, but she was already walking away before I could answer. Nobody noticed that I hadn't said much during the cleanup. Nobody noticed that my smiles had become mechanical. Nobody noticed that I'd stopped joining conversations and just nodded along when spoken to. The party wound down around 10. Everyone thanked my wife for such a fun evening, telling her how creative and funny she was. A few people clapped me on the shoulder, still chuckling about the cake. My daughter hugged me goodbye, saying she couldn't wait to show her college friends the video. After everyone left, my wife and I got ready for bed like any other night. She seemed energized by the evening's success, talking about how well everything had gone, how much everyone had enjoyed themselves. She asked if I'd had fun, and I told her it was definitely memorable. That night, lying in bed next to her, I stared at the ceiling and made some decisions. 20 years of marriage, and I'd apparently become a joke to my own family. I was the reliable, boring husband who could be publicly humiliated for entertainment. I was average, predictable, safe. The next morning, I went to work like normal. But during my lunch break, I drove to a different bank across town. I opened a new checking account under just my name. It was a small step, but it felt like waking up from a long sleep. Over the next few days, I watched how my wife and daughter interacted with me. Every conversation felt different now that I was paying attention. They had inside jokes I wasn't part of. They shared looks when they thought I wasn't watching. I wasn't imagining it. I really had become their source of amusement. My daughter called from college a few days later, still laughing about the party. She wanted to know if I'd seen how many likes the video had gotten. She said her friends thought my wife was hilarious and that I was such a good sport. I told her I was glad everyone enjoyed it. After I hung up, I sat in my home office and really looked at my life. I'd been sleepwalking through my marriage for years, accepting whatever scraps of affection came my way. I'd convinced myself that being comfortable was the same as being happy. I'd let myself become exactly what that cake said I was, average. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you advantages people don't see coming. I started small. I began moving money from our joint accounts to my new account, just a little at a time. Nothing that would trigger any alerts or questions. I told my wife I was working late more often, which wasn't unusual since I'd always been the type to stay busy during tax season. What I was really doing was meeting with lawyers. 3 different ones, actually, to get a full picture of my options. I learned about asset division, about divorce proceedings, about how to protect myself financially. I was methodical about it, taking notes, asking questions, preparing. I also hired a private investigator. Something about my wife's behavior over the past few months had been nagging at me. The closed laptops, the whispered phone calls, the sudden interest in working longer hours at the boutique. My gut was telling me there was more to this story. The PI's report arrived the following week. Photos, timestamps, detailed observations. My wife had been having an affair for 8 months with the boutique owner. They met at hotels during her supposed work hours, took weekend trips when she claimed to be visiting her sister, spent money from our joint account on dinners and gifts for each other. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside the PI's office, looking through the evidence. 20 years of marriage, and she'd been living a double life. The cake suddenly made more sense. She wasn't just mocking me for being average, she was justifying her affair. In her mind, I was so boring, so mediocre, that she deserved better. The rage I felt was clean and cold, not the hot, explosive anger that makes you do stupid things. This was calculated fury, the kind that plans and waits and strikes at exactly the right moment. I spent the weekend acting completely normal. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday football. My wife seemed relaxed, happy even. She talked about her work, about plans for redecorating the kitchen, about our daughter's upcoming visit for spring break. I nodded and agreed and played the part of the average husband. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work. After my wife left for the boutique, I went into action. I moved the rest of our joint savings into my personal account, money I'd earned over 20 years of marriage. I closed our joint credit cards and opened new ones in just my name. I changed the passwords on all our shared accounts. Then I drove to the boutique. I walked in like any other customer, browsing the racks of overpriced clothes and accessories. My wife was in the back office with her boss, the door slightly open. I could hear them talking, laughing, making plans for another hotel meetup later that week. I cleared my throat loudly, and they both came out to greet their customer. The look on my wife's face when she saw me was priceless. Confusion, guilt, and panic all rolled into one expression. Her boss, a man about my age with too much cologne and perfectly styled hair, tried to play it off like nothing was happening. I told my wife I was there to let her know I'd be staying at a hotel for a few days, that I needed some space to think about our marriage. I said it loud enough for her boss and the other customers to hear. I mentioned that I'd moved some money around for my own peace of mind, and that she shouldn't be surprised if she had trouble accessing our accounts. The confusion on her face was shifting to alarm. She asked what I meant, what was going on, why I was acting so strange. I just smiled that same fake smile I'd worn during the birthday party and told her we'd talk soon. I left the boutique and drove straight to the divorce attorney's office. By the time my wife got home that evening, I was already 3 steps ahead of whatever conversation she thought we were going to have. Update 1. My wife tried calling me 17 times that first night. I was sitting in a decent hotel room across town, eating takeout, and watching the phone buzz on the nightstand. Finally, around midnight, I answered. She was crying, asking me to come home so we could talk. She said she didn't understand what was happening, that I was scaring her by acting so differently. I told her I wasn't ready to talk yet, that I needed more time to process some things. She asked what things, and I could hear the panic creeping into her voice. I told her I'd been doing some thinking about our marriage, about whether I was really as average as everyone seemed to think. She immediately brought up the birthday cake, apologizing profusely, saying it was just a joke and that she never meant to hurt me. I let her apologize for a while, then told her the cake was actually very enlightening. It helped me realize some truths about our relationship that I'd been avoiding. When she asked what truths, I said we'd discuss it when I was ready. The next morning, she called again. This time she was angry. She tried to access our savings account and discovered it was nearly empty. She demanded to know what I'd done with our money, where I'd moved it, whether I'd lost my mind. I explained calmly that I'd moved the money I'd earned over 20 years of marriage into an account that couldn't be touched by anyone but me. I told her that when you call someone average for 20 years, you shouldn't be surprised when they start acting like they have nothing left to lose. She threatened to call the police, to report the money as stolen. I reminded her that it was my income that had built our savings, my steady job that had paid our mortgage, my average reliability that had funded her part-time boutique hobby. I suggested she check with a lawyer before making any accusations. That afternoon, I received a call from her sister, trying to mediate. She said my wife was devastated, that she didn't understand why I was punishing her for a harmless joke. I told her sister that some jokes reveal more truth than people intend, and that maybe it was time my wife faced some consequences for taking me for granted. By Wednesday, my wife had figured out I knew about the affair. I came back to the house while she was at work to collect more of my belongings. She'd left a long letter on the kitchen table, confessing everything and begging for forgiveness. The letter was pathetic. She blamed her affair on feeling unappreciated, on our marriage becoming routine, on my lack of ambition and excitement. She said her boss made her feel special and desired in ways she'd forgotten were possible. But now she realized she'd made a terrible mistake, that she loved me and wanted to work things out. I threw the letter away and finished packing. Update 2. The divorce papers were served on Friday. My wife called me immediately, hysterical. She couldn't believe I was actually filing for divorce, that I was willing to throw away 20 years of marriage over one mistake. I corrected her, it wasn't one mistake. It was 8 months of deliberate deception, combined with years of disrespect and taking me for granted. The birthday cake wasn't the cause of our divorce. It was just the moment I stopped pretending I didn't notice how little she valued me. She begged me to consider counseling, to give her a chance to make things right. She promised to end the affair immediately, to quit her job if necessary, to do whatever it took to save our marriage. I told her that ship had sailed around the time she decided I was too average to deserve basic respect. My daughter called that weekend, furious. My wife had told her a completely different version of events, that I'd had some kind of midlife crisis and abandoned my family over a silly birthday joke. My daughter couldn't understand how I could be so cruel to her mother, how I could destroy our family over something so trivial. I asked my daughter if she thought it was normal for a wife to publicly humiliate her husband for entertainment. I asked if she thought 20 years of marriage and partnership meant so little that it could be dismissed as a silly joke. I asked if she'd want her future husband to treat her the way her mother had been treating me. The conversation got heated. My daughter accused me of being petty and vindictive, of ruining her mother's life over hurt feelings. I told her that actions have consequences, and that maybe it was time both she and her mother learned that lesson. We didn't speak for 2 weeks after that. Meanwhile, my wife was making increasingly desperate attempts to contact me. She showed up at my hotel, at my office, at my brother's house. She sent flowers, wrote more letters, even tried to get our mutual friends to intervene on her behalf. The friends who reached out learned some interesting things during those conversations. I didn't volunteer information about the affair, but when people asked direct questions about what had caused such a sudden change in my behavior, I answered honestly. Word spread quickly through our social circle. My wife's affair partner fired her from the boutique. Apparently, having angry husbands and messy divorces associated with his business was bad for his image. My wife was suddenly unemployed, facing divorce proceedings, and dealing with the social fallout of her choices becoming public knowledge. Update 3. 3 weeks after I'd served the divorce papers, my wife's financial situation became desperate. Without her boutique income and without access to our joint accounts, she couldn't cover her expenses. She'd been living beyond our means for months, funding her affair with credit cards and cash advances. That's when she discovered I'd also closed our joint credit cards and removed her as an authorized user on my accounts. 20 years of shared financial responsibility ended with a few phone calls and signed forms. She called me at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, screaming. She'd just been denied when trying to use a credit card at the grocery store. She tried to transfer money from savings to checking and found both accounts empty from her perspective. She'd called the bank and been told she no longer had access to several accounts. Through her rage and tears, she kept repeating the same phrase. "You emptied everything. You emptied everything." I sat up in my hotel bed, turned on the lamp, and listened to her fall apart over the phone. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, when she finally understood that actions have consequences, that 20 years of taking someone for granted doesn't end well. I told her very calmly that I hadn't emptied everything. I'd simply taken back what was mine and removed her access to funds she'd been using to finance her double life. I reminded her that the money in those accounts came from my job, my steady and reliable and average job that she'd mocked so publicly. She threatened to take me to court to fight for half of everything in the divorce. I reminded her that adultery affects asset division in our state and that I had extensive documentation of her affair. I also mentioned that using marital funds to finance an extramarital relationship could be considered dissipation of assets. The screaming stopped. The legal reality was sinking in. She asked what I wanted, what it would take for me to give her access to money so she could survive until the divorce was finalized. I told her I wanted her to understand what it felt like to be powerless, to have your security stripped away by someone who claimed to love you. I wanted her to know what it was like to be average. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. My wife received significantly less than half of our assets due to her affair and the money she'd spent on her boyfriend. She had to sell the house because she couldn't afford the mortgage alone. She moved into a small apartment across town and took a job at a department store. My daughter eventually came around, especially after she learned the full truth about her mother's affair. She apologized for the birthday video and for not seeing how unhappy I'd been. We're rebuilding our relationship slowly. As for me, I bought a smaller house in a better neighborhood. I got a promotion at work. Turns out being reliable and methodical are valuable traits when you actually apply them strategically. I started dating again, meeting women who appreciate stability and kindness rather than taking it for granted. Sometimes people ask if I regret how I handled the situation, if I think I was too harsh. I tell them about the cake, about sitting in my own living room being mocked by my own family, about cleaning up the mess alone while everyone laughed at my expense. Then I asked them what they would have done. The truth is, I don't regret anything. My wife spent years teaching me that I was average, forgettable, unworthy of basic respect. She was right about one thing: I was average. Average people don't usually fight back, don't usually plan, don't usually have the patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike. But sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. Sometimes, average men do extraordinary things when pushed too far. And sometimes, the person laughing loudest at your expense ends up learning the hardest lessons about consequences. My ex-wife learned that lesson at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, screaming into the phone about empty accounts and a life that had fallen apart in the span of a few weeks. I learned something too, that being average was never the problem. The problem was accepting that being average meant accepting less than I deserved. I deserved better than a wife who mocked me publicly and cheated on me privately. I deserved better than a family who saw me as entertainment rather than a person. I deserved better than spending 20 years being taken for granted by people who claimed to love me. Now I have better. And my ex-wife has exactly what she gave me for 20 years. Nothing but the consequences of her choices and the realization that some mistakes can't be fixed with apologies and tears. The cake was right about one thing: I am average. But average doesn't mean powerless, and it doesn't mean I have to accept being treated as less than human by the people who were supposed to love me most. It just means I know how to plan, how to wait, and how to strike when the time is right. And trust me, the timing was perfect.